Which trays should you use to raise mealworms in? Let's talk about it. My name is Justin Meyer. I run Midwest Mealworms here in Ashland, Missouri, and I'm going to walk through several different options that I've used and have experience with in the past. None of these are better than the other. It's all contingent on what your goal is, what your space availability is, what your budget is. One of the great things about raising mealworms is that you can use all different sorts of containers. One of the bad things is that you can use all different sorts of containers, so it can be very, very overwhelming to get started and decide if you're making the right choice. So let's walk through several different options, give you some feedback on what you want to try to look for in a tray, and kind of walk through some pros and cons here of these options. These are by no means the only options. These are the ones that I've got available here, that I've got experience with in the past, and want to walk through with you. So the first thing, one of these simple Sterilite storage containers. Sterilite, Rubbermaid, anything will do. This is a rather small option. So you can see it's pretty tiny. This one is going to be extremely low production. One reptile, maybe two. Don't go this route for poultry from this size. You're going to need more mealworms than that. But it's a pretty straightforward option. You've got different drawers here that you can use for the different stages of the beetle or of the mealworms. You've got beetles, mealworms, you've got the pupa, and you have some additional drawers that you can utilize for either more mealworms, more beetles, etc. The one thing you want to pay attention to in a drawer system like this is that it's enclosed. And what I mean by that is when you push this drawer in, there's not going to be a lot of airflow around here, okay? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of, so that when you use these and you put moisture in for the larvae or the beetles, you don't have to put as much as if you're in an open container, okay? Humidity percentage is going to play a role, but in general, because this is going to be closed, you don't have to put as much moisture in, because that moisture is not going to be able to get out. If you put too much in here, what you'll notice is on the sides, you'll start seeing some moisture build up, okay? There's a couple good indications that you're putting in too much moisture. That's one of them, the moisture buildup on the sides, potentially the top of the inside here. The other thing is, if you add moisture in and it's not gone within 24 to 48 hours, you've added too much, okay? You don't want to risk the chance of mold growing in there. That's going to mess with those insects. So start with lower volumes of moisture, whatever you're feeding with, whether it's potatoes, carrots, water gel crystals, spraying water, etc. Start with a low amount, check it after a day. If it's gone, you could potentially add a little more, see how it's going the next day, and adjust, right? And it's going to depend on how much larvae you have in here and how much beetles you have in here. It's one of those things where just experiment with it, but start with a low volume of moisture so that you don't put in too much, okay? But these drawers work perfectly fine. If you wanted to, I have seen people drill into the side, put holes in the sides here. Not really super necessary. You're going to be checking and looking at this a few times a week at least. So oxygen getting in here isn't a huge concern, because again, these aren't secure and completely closed. You can go with a much larger container that uses drawers like this. That's perfectly fine. One thing to keep in mind is mealworms don't need a ton of vertical space, okay? So if you get one of those drawers that's each drawer is a foot tall, you're losing a lot of space there, because those mealworms only need the 3 inches or so. You know, you want an inch of substrate, your mealworms, your beetles. You want a little wiggle room in there for frass buildup, adding some substrate. So 3 inches is a good drawer height to aim for, but it's not terrible. If you can find the taller drawers, or that's what you have available, it will work. You're just going to lose a little bit of growing space the taller those trays are, okay? But these work perfectly great. No concerns with them. They're usually for lower volume production needs. Reptiles, maybe you've got a couple chickens, couple quail, things like that. But a smaller tray system like this works perfectly fine. All right, let's talk about open trays. So several options here, and I don't have a recommendation on what you should use for your context. Again, that's going to depend on what's going on. I use these blue ones now, and I'll talk about that. But in general, what is similar across all of these is they're open, so it allows airflow to go in and out. It doesn't allow heat buildup. because that airflow is going in and out. And we've got clean vertical sides, okay? And you want to be able to clean these because mealworms can climb dirty plastic. If there's too much buildup on the sides here, which will happen over time, so it is something you're going to need to do, is to clean these routinely. Not often, it's not an every week kind of thing. I do our trays once they've gone through a full cycle, which is generally about 3 to 4 months, depending on temp and humidity and how things are going. But in general, what you want to look for is clean vertical sides. So if you're getting containers used, you want to make sure these aren't roughed up, because if they are roughed up, that's basically handholds for those insects to be able to climb out, especially the beetles. The other thing you'll notice is that these are all various sizes, dimensions, right? So this one is 5 inches tall, this one's 3 inches tall, 6 inches tall, I believe about 6 inches tall as well. The height, again, what you're aiming for is at least 3 inches. So if you have a 1-inch pan, that's probably much, much too short. You're not going to be able to get enough substrate in there to last long enough. It's not going to work out well. So go for a taller open tray like this. And again, aim for about 3 inches or more. Let's start with this Rubbermaid bus tote. These are designed for restaurants, cleaning off tables, etc. They're nice and sturdy. The downside is the ribbing on the bottom that they've added for strength for its original purpose. This just creates places for things to settle and little crevices that have to be cleaned. It's not a flat bottom. But these will work just fine. They don't stack super, super well after about 6 to 8 of these. You do have to stack them crisscross like that. But these are 5 inches tall, clean sides, and they'll work perfectly fine. You can create or build a tower out of whatever materials you have available. A lot of people will use wood. And then you can slide these in using the sides, using those these guys here. Slide them in on slats of wood so that you can go vertical without having to rely on the interlocking or the crisscrossing. From a dimension perspective, these are 20 by 15 by 5. Dimensions are irrelevant. It really depends on your space and what you have around you to get. So if you have a larger option, that would be perfectly fine. What you want to think about from a tray size perspective is what can you physically handle from a weight perspective? So mealworms aren't super, super heavy, right? But after frass buildup, substrate that you might add in there, and larva and beetle weight, these things aren't going to be featherweight, right? So you want to think about what you can physically lift and move around and how many times you're going to want to do that. The larger trays you have, the more weight they're going to potentially have in them, okay? The other thing is, on this type of tray that's much wider and longer, your wingspan, your physical, you know, how much you can actually pick up and how I don't want to say how large you are, but just how big you are, I guess, saying the same thing there. This might be more difficult for you to handle, right? And so pick a tray that's going to be simple for you to be able to manipulate and adjust and work, because these trays get moved around. You're going to have to clean these trays, you're going to have to pick them up, carry them around. You don't want super heavy trays, so aim for something that's lightweight. That way when you're processing and working your colony, it doesn't become a huge, huge physical impediment for you to have to deal with, okay? So these Rubbermaid totes work perfectly fine. They are good, sturdy, long-term. We've washed these several times. What I don't like about these is the stacking, right? So you can only go so tall with these. Generally, I would say about 6 tall, and they become a little bit unstable. So you're losing additional vertical space that you could potentially raise mealworms in. And they become a knockover hazard, meaning once you stack these up, you bump that top one, it's going to be more likely to just fall over. Okay? All right. Let's chat about this black one. Let's set the white one aside. We'll touch on that one in a moment. Let's talk about this black one. This black one here is a cement mixing tub. Any big box hardware store here in the US is going to have these. They'll have different variations. Some of them have a skinnier side that has a ruler on it. Some of them will have a wider side. This is a 7-gallon, I want to say it's a 7-gallon cement mixing tub. And so what you want to do with these don't stack well at all. You can do the crisscross method, but because of the way that they're curved on the sides, once you get some weight in these, they will become very tip prone if you try to stack them. So if you're going to go with these, you're definitely going to need some sort of wooden tower or structure that you can create basically a shelf system and put these in. Okay, but these work really well. From a budget perspective, these are probably the most economical to start with. Last I checked, these were between $7 to $10, just depending on the store, the sale, etc. But these are super, super good to start with. The one thing that I don't like about these trays is that they're 6 inches tall. And so what that means is, since we only need 3 inches, if I have a tray that's 3 inches tall, I could get 2 of them in the same space that one would go in. Okay, so I'm effectively cutting my production in half if I go with a taller tray like this. But these work perfectly fine. I had lots of these running at one time. I want to say about 60 to 80 back in the old farm. They work perfectly well. They're sturdy. They've lasted a long time. I started using them in the sifting towers that I built, and they've stood the test of time. So I really like these. And again, these are readily available at big box hardware stores. From a size perspective, again, they have bigger options, I believe. Just go for something that you can physically handle and that's within your budget, of course. Okay, we'll put that one aside. All right, let's talk about this. So this is a dough proofing tray. These are actually built to nest inside of each other. Do not do that with mealworms. They will sit inside of each other really well, and you could stack these all the way to the wall. They're very secure. But what that's going to do is it's going to cut off airflow. It's going to increase the temperature in that tray. And when you add moisture, if you put these trays nested in on top of each other, that moisture has nowhere to go. It's going to collect on the sidewalls. It's going to stay in the substrate, and you will get mold. So do not do that. But these are much sturdier from a crisscross perspective than those black trays. Okay, and so these generally I could get about 14 stacked up crisscross before they got a little dicey from a weight stability perspective. But again, that becomes a tip over issue and risk. And so I've done that a couple times. I used these white dough proofing trays in the old farm because they stacked well from that perspective, but they also allowed me to, I started building the wooden towers. It allowed me to get double the amount of trays when I went from the black ones to the white ones. And so production went through the roof because we were able to get more of these in. So these are 3 inches tall, 26 by 18, I believe. So they do get fairly heavy if you don't process them and get the frass out of there. That becomes kind of weighty. And with a good amount of larvae in here, these can just be kind of bulky to move around depending, again, on that wingspan you've got. But I really like these trays. Both these trays and the black tray and this guy here have good resale value. So that's another thing to think about, is because they're sturdy, they work really well. Long term, these are going to stand up. And as long as you're not using chemicals in your operation, then folks are going to be inclined to go ahead and purchase these. I sold a bunch of them as or to some pizza companies around town whenever I moved to these blue trays that I'll talk about in a moment. Okay. What I like about these, though, they've got extra structure on the bottom. They do have these little notches so that when you do crisscross them, they kind of settle into each other, which I really like. These I got from webstrontstore.com. I really liked their customer service at the time. It's been about, I want to say maybe 2 years since I've ordered from them. I would get them in batches. They come in boxes of like 6 to 12, I believe, at the time. And so I would get at least 12 of them, maybe 24, play around with the shipping to see what it did a little bit. But I really liked Webstront Store's customer service. These trays are prone to damage during shipment. And so what I would find is maybe on half of my orders, I would have 1 or 2 trays where the corners were split and broken, right? And so all I had to do was reach out to customer support. They would ask me for a picture of it and whether I wanted a refund or a replacement. And I always chose replacement because I wanted those trays for production. And so they would just ship another one out at no cost to me. So fantastic customer service from Webstront Store. I believe that they're still in that same boat. So I'd recommend checking them out and getting trays from them. Not sponsored at all. Again, this is just from my experience with these. I used these for several years in the old building and really, really like them. I did sell about half, maybe 3/4 of the trays of these that I had when I switched to these blue trays. Okay. But again, the nice clean vertical sides, these are food grade, so you can clean them, rinse them, take care of them over time, and they'll be usable for a really, really long time. All right. Last but not least, the blue trays. So these trays I lucked into a couple years ago. A company in Texas decided to close their mealworm farm and sell their trays. So these trays are from Beacon Camp in the Netherlands. They are mealworm specific rearing trays. That's what they're for. You can also use them for soldier fly larvae, although not optimal, I don't think, but it still works perfectly fine. What I like about these trays are several things. One, these things are durable, just like the white dough proofing trays I showed you. I've been using these blue trays for a couple years now, and I've maybe broken 2, and that was just user error. One tray specifically I remember was extremely heavy, and I picked it up from the side here, and I put a crack right here. That was just me picking it up wrong. As I was picking it up, I could feel the strain there, and I was looking at it, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really heavy, and right about that time, it broke. So that was 100% my fault, just putting too much weight in this thing and not holding it appropriately. The other thing I really like about this is as these stack, they have these holes here on the side to allow that airflow. They have these big cutouts here, again, to allow that airflow, so temperature doesn't build up, moisture doesn't build up. It has a way to escape. I really like that. These cutouts are also, because they're so deep, as these trays are stacked, you can visually see and inspect in there if you need to. Once you have your process down, mealworms become pretty repetitive and pretty replicatable, so that you don't need to put eyes on them as often as you do when you're first starting or when you change something, right? But what I really liked about these, and still like about them, is that I can see in there to see, is there something going on with this particular set of trays, or this particular tray, depending on where it's at in the cycle. And I really just like the ability to do that. The other benefit is, because it has these cutouts, you can then add moisture without having to move the trays. So let me show you an example. When you stack these trays, I'm gonna get my hand in here, right? And so as you're feeding your moisture sources, whether it's potatoes, carrots, cucumbers, squash, water gel crystals, spraying water, you have access. You can get in without having to mess with this, right? Without having to pull something like a drawer or a shelf, without having to open anything up. It's just very quick to go through and pop in that moisture. That brings up a downside to this. The downside is, if you have a stack of these, right now we stack about 15 to 17 high. If you have a stack of these and the bottom one is having a problem and you need to take that bottom one out, it does mean that you have to take those 16, in our case, take those 16 off to get access to this, right? That very infrequently happens, and it does not outweigh the immense benefit of being able to stack these high and not have that pull-out type feature, right? These things work fantastic. Super excited to have them. I continue to buy these and use these. So these come from Beacon Camp in the Netherlands, like I mentioned. I also acquired a few of them from tricycle.eco up in Canada. These are pretty pricey to ship if you buy a low quantity. But as with anything, if you buy in bulk, the shipping price becomes a little bit better, but your cost goes up because you're buying more of these trays. That's the biggest downside from a small operation perspective, is being able to get these trays. It's sort of a hassle. So that being said, I love these trays. I will continue to try to get them and use them because I haven't found anything that does better yet. One thing that I want to mention as well, so in my old building, previous building to this one, I use these white dough proofing trays as the primary tray that I was utilizing to rear the mealworms. I had about 400 in the floor space in the old building, 400 of these trays. When I switched to these trays, I was able to get 700 in the same square footage. So that allowed our production, again, to be much, much higher. And what was so much better about these, all the things I mentioned about being able to access them, see them, hydrate them, it improved our time, right? So when we went from 400 trays to 700 trays, it wasn't like we were doubling our time. Because with these guys, in a tower system, you have to pull it out. You pull that out, feed it, check it, close it back up. Constant movement, right? With these guys, boom, 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 boom. You're checking them while you're processing them, getting them hydrated, etc. And so our time, our labor didn't double, but we were able to double our production. That was awesome. Let me think if I'm forgetting anything. I do like that these trays allow me to write on the side here because of the color. The black trays are very difficult to see, so there was a sticker on that. I don't know if you saw that. But these are super great. You just write whatever you need to. I'm currently using a wet erase marker. I'm going to try some different options just to make it a little easier to clean off when we're done. But I've had no issues in the past. These things clean up pretty good with a little bit of elbow grease. Away we go. Downside to these trays, I would say, is stability on height. When you try to integrate rolling wheels into them. I've struggled with that in the past. I think we have a solution to that I'm testing now that will allow these things to be able to roll around. But these do scoot rather well on concrete. So we have a concrete floor here. These work really well there. We haven't had a big major issue there. But from a stability perspective, these things are pretty forgiving. You can actually kind of mess up and not nest them correctly and still be okay. One of my recent videos, I actually noticed that on a stack, and I was able to pop it down. Didn't cause the whole thing to go crumbling. These things are nice and sturdy. I think that's covered everything I wanted to on tray selection. If you have any questions about trays that you have that you might want to use, please leave comments below. Happy to tackle those and answer questions. And if you found some value in the info today, please like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Those are the options I've got experience with so far. By far, these trays work fantastic. From a feasibility perspective, getting started and rolling things out, I think these two trays, the dough proofing tray and the cement mixing tray, are the better options. Okay? Thanks for stopping by. Have a good one.